The African contemporary refers elliptically to the time we in Africa are living in, as well as to the person, for our purposes, who is working in the context of jewelry. I think I have to stand here. I will use myself as the example and consider where I am located, who and what I am as a jeweler, what I make, and the era that I live in, a location and my travels. I live in Highlands North in Johannesburg. I have my workshop. It is a predominantly Jewish area, and I have been there for 18 years. I left South Africa during apartheid in 1983 and lived in Israel and the UK until 1995. I worked and studied jewelry in London and in Israel, and later fine arts in South Africa at Wits. I came back to South Africa after Mandela's release. I lived in Johannesburg for a year. It was still thick with apartheid, and left to live in rural KwaZulu-Natal, Ikopo, until 1999. I had my workshop there. Since 2001, I've traveled a lot and exhibited in Germany, America, London, Norway, Australia, and the Czech Republic. The contemporary African aggregate. I am a first-generation South African, my parents having immigrated from Poland and Lithuania before the Holocaust. I am clearly not a born free. What is my work? As an African contemporary jeweler, I make jewelry, sculpture, large adornment objects, relevant photography, installation, some performance, and video, always predicated on jewelry references. In the early post-apartheid years studying at Wits, I felt that art categories were in flux, a postmodernist South African moment. I think that cross-medium artistic expression is a contribution that South African jewelers can make to the rationale for jewelry to be considered as a bona fide art medium. Over the years, I've come to accept that my work lies on a spectrum of jewelry art and contemporary jewelry. Hybridity. Much of my work is a contemporary expression of hybridity between my Western European jewelry training and my exposure to the indigenous South African cultural adornment objects. Added to the mix is my commitment to the pre-colonial goldsmithing history of Mapungubwe circa 900 to 1300 AD. My work is also informed by my Jewish culture. For example, when I heard about Mapungubwe, its significance reminded me of my own people's historical icon, the fortress of Masada. In the 1st century AD, the Romans invaded Israel, and the Jews living at the fortress of Masada near the Dead Sea preferred to commit suicide than to submit to the Romans and be taken into slavery. Masada forms an iconic part of my cultural identity as a Jew. I draw a parallel with Mapungubwe for South Africans. An indigenous Southern African community existed at Mapungubwe approximately 400 years before any known white colonization of Africa. Of core importance is the evidence that these people were mining, refining, and making gold objects and jewelry, as well as trading in gold with China and some Arab countries for glass and ceramics. Mapungubwe is a source of cultural power and individual self-esteem. I have made jewelry and sculpture addressing the fact that Mapungubwe is the true origin of the gold industry of South Africa. Mining history. My work is also framed by how the politics of apartheid impacted on the jewelry industry, how the focus was on the miners and exporting our raw materials. This was aided and abetted by the international commercial jewelry industry. There has never been a TRC for the mines. The African contemporary living in Africa now. We are in the fifth of the 21st century and the first 23 years of post-apartheid South Africa. Politically, this includes living under President Mandela and his freedom policy, President Mbeki and his AIDS policy, and President Zuma and his corruption policy. My idealism, creativity, and hope have been commensurate with our leaders' impact on the people. Our time is also the era of the speedy internet, where opportunities, as others have said, to show and sell our work and to engage with other artists in other geographical locations is possible. Exhibitions like Schmuck Sonderschau in Germany and Refined in America are examples. Identity. As I am only a first-generation South African, and having lived away for a long time, I do see my position as an objective observer admirer of the South African indigenous cultures, which have been a source of intrigue and exoticism for me. Why for me, and not for the young born-free jewelers of South Africa? A part of this is for me a moral role to redress the historical deprecation of these objects and the integrity of the accompanying indigenous skills through my adornment works. From my own cultural history, however, I believe there is a post-apartheid parallel between the possible shame response of post-apartheid children and children of Holocaust survivors. Shaking off the history of victimization and suffering perhaps is a reason for young South Africans to prefer bling to their own old and venerated cultural backgrounds and objects, not to want to use them as a reference source for jewelry design. The apartheid past of their parents may be too painful and lacks the glow and promise of the modern West. This you do see in the children of Holocaust survivors. There is personal pain around their parents' awful history. There is a Kwantu exhibition at the South African National Gallery in Cape Town. From the late 1980s, indigenous cultural adornment objects were purchased from the Museum of Natural History into some fine art collections, including the Wits collection and the National Gallery, the latter culminating in the Ezakwantu exhibition in Cape Town in 1992. The purchase and the geographical relocation of these objects literally across the precinct in the Gardens, Cape Town, brought about the reclassification of these cultural works as fine art. The language of this process constitutes an ironic throwback to the language used for the apartheid racial processes, although here it represents the converse. Influences. Inspiration for new work cannot be neatly boxed. The late Alan Crump used to say to me, "Make the work and you'll know what to say about it afterwards." David Andrew used to say, "You won't know if you don't try." The explanations follow the work. Improvisation and innovation in Africa. Having spent much time with overseas contemporary jewelers and artists, I've seen examples of their iconoclastic movement of the past 50 years. They have been inverting the traditional materials intrinsic to jewelry, initially triggered by post-World War II frugality. In the Netherlands, for example, exploring the potential of materials to their absolute finality was something Ruud Peters taught me. Some jewelers like Carl Fritsch, as Jerry has mentioned, have pushed precious material jewelry to a nihilistic or anti-jewelry aesthetic. Not well known to the international community jewelers is the fact that Southern Africans have been playing with so-called alternative materials for centuries. They intelligently improvised, perhaps according to the materials available. As said, for example, a plastic tablecloth might replace leather to make an Ndebele marriage apron. The urgency to create the object drove the innovation and improvisation with consistent and transferred skill, credibility, and completing objects of great integrity. In some adornment objects, it is evident that there was also a fascination with and appropriation of Western materials. For example, the use of plastic numbers and keys in a Lovedu necklace, which can be seen in the Wits publication Engaging Modernities. A contribution to jewelry as a unique art form. I think about the human body as a living plinth for jewelry objects. Some of my work conveys a dynamic triad, the relationship between the three components, the wearer, the jewel as the inanimate mediator, and the Earth's gravity. For example, when an Ndebele person wears a lenaga, a wedding cape, which is one of the largest adornment objects on the planet, there is a huge commitment. The weight and vastness of the object forces the wearer to accommodate the object. The object is vivified with the wearer's movement, even with a swishing noise. The back and front of the wearer's body are equally important, contrary, for example, to pinning a tiny European brooch or even a big one onto one's chest, or placing the aesthetic emphasis only on the front of the body, say a necklace. Permissions, dialogue, discourse, and context to make work. Over the years, when I have listened to other jewelers talk or seen their work, I am sometimes struck by a mental wave of, yes, I now have permission to make that work that has sat in my head for ages. My jewelry language and logic meet an engaging partner. Hope that a context exists for that new work and that there will be an audience. When I look at the work, for example, of Ella Natsui, the African textile artist, whose work shows anthropomorphic trace, or Cyrus Kabiru, who is so clever in his commercial use of photography and create saleable multiples of his work, I get this feeling of the cleverness of Africa. Kabiru creates intricate sculptural works from found materials. He is best known for his collection of eyewear and self-portrait photographs wearing his creations. Inventing something. As we do, I have overcome personal doubt of what other people will think of my works here and overseas, or if they will be bought. There is courage to risk self-consciousness if one's invention is thought of as a little mad initially. Something comes to mind which is logical and obvious to me. People may patronize when they don't know what they're looking at. They don't know that they're looking at something special. Rather, they know they're looking at something special, but they don't really get it yet. And maybe me as the maker, I don't even get it yet. Then they see other people getting it and begin to respect you and eventually buy your work. It is good to have invented at least one jewelry thing in my life, actually two. In 1997, living in Ikopo, I invented a method of making jewelry from pictures, which I frame in aluminium foil. The units are called photemes, or visual units of information, for necklaces and bracelets, etc. For me, its simplicity has a deep structure which has informed my work for many years. From the multiple commercial ranges which were ubiquitous in South Africa and outside, they were a source of income, lots of fun, easy to wear, without fear in South Africa, and allowed me to teach 6 women my skills and supply them with work. The technique has also led me to make much larger work and an eventual extrapolation into gold. One more page. A personal word on creativity and innovation. Sometimes when I look at an object, I think I have seen something which it turns out was not there, or I make a mistake. These are precious moments because I've learned that what I think I saw or the mistake I made can serve as the seed of an idea for the next work. The African contemporary on the planet. A challenge is to continue to engage with the Western non-African countries and with the work in other African countries and with each other, and to be able to convey the integrity of our African jewelry objects in a dialogue of equality and respect for difference. One avenue for this may well be the Art Jewelry Forum. Okay, then I'm involved with something called the Africa to Africa Jewelry Project. I had been looking for Jewish content for my picture jewelry for years. In 2014, I was shown the paintings of some young Ethiopian Jewish children living in Israel. I've developed a project between myself and my group in South Africa and these Ethiopian Israeli young artists. We are Jews connected by Africa via Israel, and this is amazing for me. I met the community in June. It was amazing for me to be able to speak to them in Hebrew. When I lived in KwaZulu-Natal, I spoke Zulu. It's just an amazing thing to have black people who are Jewish. The children's paintings represent the biblical characters and stories of their Jewish African origins, using black people in their paintings. Some kind of apartheid circle has closed for me. Thanks. I have one thing more to do. We'll just watch this. In which countries can you use the word waliki? I'll just talk about this a little. So, we've been involved in this for Anglo Ashanti competition. So very simple, no soldering. It's just a ladder which the outside pieces are separated by wooden beads. And Franz Weber made the tutu to match the necklace. So this is called surfing the neck. And this was about the emperor's gold clothing. Made of acetate. And I worked with the helix form for a while. Found that with a hollow, if I just let go of one join, I formed a helix, which was an amazing discovery, one of those mistakes. We made with butterfly, the acetate butterflies and laminated gold. And then I work with the level. It's fun, each of these is the same weight, 6.3 grams. 5 silver forged in circle. And the bubble is critical for the ergonomics of the body. Okay, so I've got that piece around the so the weight of the piece falls forward. Done. Okay, is that so? Okay, can I please just, I've got 1 minute to show that other video. How do I do that here? It's just added, it's making a check. It doesn't. Unless you show it, it's good. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Beverly. What an amazing portfolio of work. Thank you for sharing. Are there any questions from the audience? Temba. Temba wanted to ask us something a little bit earlier on.
It was actually a comment on what Mr. Chris said, like in terms of design. Like throughout the years, I've realized that like what lecturers or teachers should teach is the how instead of the what, because the how addresses the process in design. And like the what, it's limited, because it can only help the student to do that particular project. But instead of, in case of the how, like it provides you with a platform to like really explore design to its fullest. I don't know if you understand what No, it was a comment on what Mr. Chris said. Okay, I wanted to ask you, like, because I see like you are like well established, and once you are established, it provides you a platform and freedom to do like to try out a lot of things. So in your opinion, what is it that like young jewelers can do to make it?
I mean, I can really just speak from my experience. There's not a rule. But I think what was critical for me was, I think it was to have a range that was multiples. You need to have something that you can earn from, otherwise you're going to leave. You're not going to, or you'll teach. So it's great to teach. And you have to get out there. It takes a lot of courage. You have to do phoning, and you have to look. And these days, with the internet, it's perhaps it is easier. I don't know. But what I did for myself physically in the early years was, I used to go to shops, and I remember my first client was Art Africa in Parkview, and I was so afraid, to take my stuff to her. I thought I was crazy. I'd invented this thing in Ikopo, and somebody said, "You must show this work to her." After 6 months, they said to me they wanted to exchange it for something. They wanted another range. I was using pictures of Ndebele beadwork, and I did the products. So they said, "We'll take it to another client." I said, "I haven't got another client." They said, "Are you mad?" So what's hard sometimes is to believe in yourself. And I don't know the answer for that. Ideally you surround yourself with people who support you. I don't know the answer exactly. I think it's like Ellen Crump says, make the work. And it is about trust in some way. And you do discover your own integrity. You know when an object is finished. You know when it's finished. And trust this thing. I mean, I don't mean to give you an instruction. But if it's right for you, then just believe it's going to be right for somebody else. I learned that after the fact, making those funny little picture jewelry things. Other people liked them. So I don't know if that answers your question. And then it frees you up then to make the things where your mind is really going, if you want to. And then find the audience to engage with. Like I found an audience overseas to engage with. You know, people who are a little crazy. And it's all right. You know, you come together in jewelry and there's a language. You've got a commonality. You feel safe. You can create that for yourself. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Beverly. Any other questions before we move on to Chris? Another round of applause for Beverly Price.